Good morning, everyone. So today, as you can see, we're going to have a look at some ocean currents, and we're going to start by having a look at this video by NASA showing the perpetual ocean currents. Now you might wonder what's meant by that. What's a perpetual ocean current? Well, what it is, these are the main currents that run pretty much all of the time. So we have the Gulf Stream running into the North Atlantic Drift across towards Ireland. And you can see the ocean it's constantly moving, that there's lots of currents happening all the time. We have some warm currents coming up here near the coast from the equator. And this is your line of the equator here. And then we have these cooler currents moving from polar regions up towards the equator. And you can watch that in your own time. But it's just to give you an idea of what the currents are. Why might NASA be interested in measuring the currents and tracking them from space? Well, it's one of the ways that they can measure climate change and how climate change is affecting currents and how that is then affecting the climate. Okay, so these are some of your notes for today. So ocean currents, they are like the wind, they never stop moving. Ocean waters never stop moving, and the movement is called a current. Currents are warm or cold depending on where they come from, and a current is like a river flowing through the ocean. They occur because of differences in temperature, because the earth is rotating, and because of wind. Okay, so those are three things that cause ocean currents to occur. But for us, what we're going to be really focusing on is that they're warm or cold. That's going to be what we're looking at, and we're going to look a little bit at what way that affects weather. Okay. So here we have a couple of the main ones for you guys. So we have the Gulf Stream coming up here from the Gulf of Mexico, and it's a very warm ocean current because it's coming from an area near the equator, and it moves out across the Atlantic to become called the North Atlantic Drift, and that comes right into Ireland and keeps us nice and warm and gives us mild weather. The other one that I want you to be aware of is this one coming down from the North Pole, from the Arctic. And because it's coming from Arctic regions, it's going to be cold. And that is going to bring cold weather to all of these areas here that it is passing. And that's the Labrador current. You can see there's lots of other ocean currents here moving. Warm ones from the equator generally, and cold ones from the poles. Okay. Now, your warm ocean currents, what do you need to know? Well, warm currents flow from the equator, and for Ireland, the most important current that we have is the Gulf Stream, which comes from the Gulf of Mexico and becomes the North Atlantic Drift. You just need to know those two names. And the North Atlantic Drift flows past the west coast of Ireland, keeping our ports free from ice and our climate mild. That other areas that don't have the North Atlantic Drift or another warm ocean current who are at a similar latitude as us tend to have ports that get very, very wet. Sorry, not wet, very icy in wintertime. And we don't. We barely get any snow, and when we do, it's an event. So a lot of that is because of the North Atlantic Drift and the Gulf Stream. Okay, so we have again, this is just showing here it comes from the equator up through the Gulf of Mexico. So Mexico is just here and off across the Atlantic as the North Atlantic Drift, keeping us nice and warm. Now I wanted to show you a place that's at a similar latitude to Cork. That's Prince Edward Island in Canada. This is how Prince Edward Island looks in wintertime. So you can see this guy is walking through 5 or 6 feet of snow, and it builds up on the sides of the roads as well. So they're at a similar latitude to us, so that means that they are getting the same relative amount of daylight. The sun is the same intensity, and yet this is how they look in winter. And if you go to Ireland, this is how we look on a good winter day. And if we get snow, maybe it's on upland areas and very, very little. So just keep that in mind now when you're thinking about your warm ocean current for us and the cool ocean current for them. So cold ocean currents flow from areas of high latitudes. So you're talking about from the poles, the Arctic and the Antarctic, towards the equator. So you're thinking about polar ice caps melting and that cold water flowing from those areas towards the equator. The Labrador Current, that's really the only one that I want you to know the name of, is a cold current that flows from the Arctic along the northeast coast of America. It reduces the temperature of the ocean, causing many ports to freeze in winter, and it also leads to that kind of weather or climate that they get quite heavy snow along the coast, as we just saw in the previous photos. And the next thing that we want to have a look at after our ocean currents is air masses. So what I want you to think about is when you are watching the news, and you can see here that we have a low pressure coming in towards Ireland and the UK, and there's another low pressure way out here over the Gulf of Mexico, and there's a high pressure here over Canada. So these are the air masses. Okay, so what is an air mass? So air masses are large moving pockets of air that are distinct or different from the surrounding atmosphere. And we know already that warm air masses, so warm air carries more moisture than cold air, so warm air masses carry more moisture than cold air masses. And air masses are large. They can be more than 1,500 kilometers across and several kilometers up into the atmosphere. They usually have similar temperature, pressure and moisture across the air mass. So they have similar weather within the air mass, and they travel across the atmosphere as a single large unit. So this is what Met Éireann and the different Met offices across the world try to track, are these air masses, the low pressure and high pressure air masses. So in Ireland, we have air masses that come from different areas. We have our polar maritime, which comes down from this direction, from the northwest towards Ireland. And as you can imagine, it's cold and it's wet. We have polar continental, which is coming down from this direction. It's coming across Europe, so it's usually drier and cold. We have tropical maritime. This is usually where our weather is coming from. So it's warm or it's mild and usually quite wet as well. And then we have our tropical continental, where we have air coming up from the Sahara Desert down here. So it's usually hot and usually kind of dry air. So it's the type of weather that you like to see turning up in summertime. So we're going to go through these air masses individually and just talk a little bit about how they affect Ireland. So the first one is polar maritime. They come from the northwest Atlantic and they bring cold, wet and showery conditions. And that will look familiar to a lot of you. The next one is Arctic. They come from the North Pole. They bring cold weather conditions. They can come in winter or in summer. And usually you get these frosty conditions which are quite nice. If it comes in summer, you will get frost at night but very clear skies during the day, so usually it's quite nice weather. Polar continental. These come from the northeast of Europe and they bring dry, cold and frosty nights, and usually when they reach Ireland it causes the moisture in our air to fall as snow. So we don't get those very often. The next one is our tropical continental. These are air masses from the Sahara bringing dry, sunny weather. We would have had these when we had the drought in Ireland 2 years ago. That's a nice sight. And then our tropical maritime. So air masses that come from the southwest, and they bring rain all year round. This is our default setting. This is where most of our weather comes from, as I said, and this is what this weather tends to look like. It tends to be quite moisture laden because they are warm air masses, and they tend to fall either heavy or light rain and clouds most of the year. So these again, this is your air masses. So we have our Arctic or our polar air masses, our polar continental. Hot air brings dry summers, cold air brings snow in winter, so really nice weather. Tropical continental again. North Africa, hot dry weather in summer. Our polar maritime, wet, cold, showery weather, winter and summer. Returning polar air, so moist, mild, unstable, showers, rain. And then our tropical maritime air mass, as we said already, it brings a little bit of rain and mild weather, and we see a lot of it. And then up here at the very top, from the Arctic, cold air brings snow in winter. So this one here, the tropical maritime, is our usual one. Okay? Alright guys, so make sure you get your notes taken down.